Peace, what's going on, y'all? It's your man, Soul Man IT. Welcome and welcome back to the channel. This is Home Arcade Classics. Today's episode is based around the battle of preserving video games. Now, if you haven't been paying attention to video game industry news, Nintendo has been in the news for at least two things in the past couple weeks. The first one being they just opened up their museum, the Nintendo Museum. There'll be a link to that down below. Looks pretty awesome, not even gonna lie. Looks like they've put a lot of thought into all these different exhibits that showcases the history of Nintendo as a games company, and not just video games, but just like, childhood games and even just trading cards and showing the OG roots of Nintendo. Now, the second thing, when you juxtapose that with, and when you put this in the context of the preservation of video games, in particular, let's using Nintendo as the main example, their lawsuit that they have against Palworld. Now, some of y'all saw my last video that I had made around that, and y'all were quite vocal in saying basically how you disagree with Nintendo's stance in fighting Palworld on patent infringement, not copyright infringement, which I thought I made clear that I knew that there was a difference. Maybe I didn't make it clear enough that there is a difference in relation to the patent versus copyright. But basically the case that Nintendo has made is when you are ripping off or plagiarizing, for lack of a better term, their gameplay mechanics. So in this case, I think still at the time of writing, it hasn't been made clear which patents Nintendo is saying that Pocket Pair, the company that made Palworld, has infringed upon. My best guess is the game mechanics of throwing a spherical or ball device to capture a creature and then be able to raise that creature, and then you can release that creature as far as battle is concerned. So just that whole concept is a patent that Nintendo holds for however long the game patents you can hold them for. Patent infringement, copyright infringement is, it never used to be this trivial or this complicated. In my opinion, it never used to be. What I mean by that is like, let's just say this is the first cup ever made. Let's say I made the first cup. Should I get paid for every single cup that gets made? To me, that doesn't seem right or fair when it's something as simple as a cup. Not to say that there wasn't work or intelligence or anything of that nature that wasn't put into the creation of this cup, right? But the main point being, when you make something that's that universal, right? Should the original person who made that be paid for the crafting of a cup itself? Or should it be like, let's just say there was a patent on having a cup with a spoon, a stirring spoon that you place inside this here. Should the person get paid royalties or some kind of a licensing fee, right, if you wanted to make your own version of that cup? Let me know down below what y'all thoughts are on that, because basically what it looks like the difference is between a cup versus, let's say someone does a remote control. Well, how does the remote control work? Well, it works off of infrared technology, right? Or it works off of radio signals. So are we patenting the mechanic of the radio signal and sending a frequency out or a wave out that controls a device that's a certain proximity away, right? Or are we patenting the shape and the make of the remote control itself and what it can control? Like, there's a bunch of different types of remote controls. Remote controls for your garage door, remote controls for your television, remote controls for your remote control car. So then the questions then start to be like, well, who gets paid for the creation of these things here, right? And it doesn't seem, I think my biggest issue that I'm starting to notice, whether it's listening to fellow people just talk about this, or if it's listening to different businesses and industry people, whether it's small or mainly corporate in this case here, them discuss. There doesn't seem to be a consistent stance on copyright and patents and intellectual property, who gets paid, really who's getting paid fairly, right? Because what this is starting to look like is going to happen with the video game industry is what happened with the music industry, and specifically music production. So if folks are arguing about patents and game mechanics and who gets paid and who owns, the mechanics of something and for how long, it's no different than sampling in music. And what ended up happening with that, like I'm 37. So when I was a teenager, when I first started doing music, like at 14, 15, like how you were taught to sample was very much in a rebellious manner as a youngin'. You ain't have the money to pay for licensing fees or any of that, really. It was more so you're going to learn how to sample and you're going to get great at it. So you're going to sample, a bunch of different records. You're going to sample CDs. Some of us would hook our video games up to the TV and then reroute the TV sound to our audio setup, and we would sample video games and the sound effect, and we would turn all this stuff into music. Now, with that being said, the older I've gotten and the more I've wanted people to pay for my music, because as a musician, it's hard to get paid, and especially when your end product, which in a music album or a piece of music, recorded music, is disposable, right? Most people aren't paying for your music anymore, really. They're paying for a streaming platform service. And you see how little we get paid off of that, which is kind of where I've seen video games, like they're starting. They have the potential to go that way. Now, right now, we're all paying for video games individually. In my experience, when it comes to these libraries, they don't always have the best selections of games and the classics and the stellar ones that you want to go back to and play, and that's worth the actual monthly fee of like $10, $20. I think in Microsoft's case it's $20, like, which has me rethinking, like, am I even going to keep being on the Game Pass anymore? Because they haven't really added games that make it worth, especially at $240 basically a year. Which then brings it back to where it's just like, so how are we actually preserving video games? Because the other thing I forgot to mention, and if we're using Nintendo as the example, is they're coming at all the content creators, or whichever ones they see fit, that do emulations of their video games. Now that's also a tricky space, because on one hand, I understand if you're the person who made the games, or you're the person who distributed the games, or both in the case of Nintendo, like, you're not trying to have someone emulate your video game if it's not on the original console, right? This is essentially piracy. And piracy is also a tricky thing, because some pirates come about because of the imperialization of others, right? And so the pirates that come about to face Imperials are essentially like the rebels. If we're using a modern example, would be Star Wars, the Rebel Alliance versus the Imperials. Or we could just use the Imperial colonist example of, like, England. Everybody hated, like, the pirates that went against the Imperials, but then there were some folks who did not hate the pirates that went against the Imperials because of what the colonizers were doing. Now, this is where it gets tricky, because we're using terms that when you don't put them in a proper context could have consequences. It just becomes a real tricky space to navigate, because in the sense of music, what the industry called pirating, when it comes like to the mixtape game, for example, there were a lot of artists that would not have been found had it not been for mixtapes. There is a whole generation that was generations raised on mixtapes, right? Radio DJs making their own mixtapes and making their own cuts in their own types of records, like, and the precedents that set and how it changed how we made albums, even because there was a time where the mixtapes, and to some degree the mixtape, if you still make them, the mixtapes will be way more fire than the album will be. And so it's difficult to have like a whole stance against piracy when it's just like, I think what it all really comes down to is there a fair way, and not a fairer? Is there a fair, across the board way of people who make video games, them getting paid, and not just big corporations, like independent, 1 to 5 person, 20 person studios, right? That work day in, day out. Is there a way for them to get honorably paid on these different platforms that sell video games? Because right now, as it is, if you're not selling on the Nintendo Switch Online store or the PlayStation Plus store or the PlayStation store or the Xbox store, it's like, where else can you sell video games and get paid? And you can get paid through like the third party places, but like, are the splits that are being developed or being paid out, are they fair? Are they fair percentages? It just doesn't seem, and I know I'm kind of rambling about it all. I'm trying to put it all in a concise conversation. So I do apologize for kind of having it all over the place. Or not kind of, but having it all over the place. But, the point being is, I think I am touching on the points where what might end up happening is, just like with music, we end up having these video game asset marketplaces if they don't exist already. And what I mean by that is, so for those who make beats, what ended up happening was you have music artists who get together, or sometimes it's just a solo artist that knows how to play multiple instruments, and they literally will create music packs for other producers to sample. So what might end up happening is those who make video games might make graphic assets or mechanics and things like that. Aside from those who just come out with a whole system for you to make video games, I'm just talking about just video game assets libraries where you go to a spot and all they sell is game mechanics, right? Now what can end up happening with that is that the market in this space becomes saturated with things that sound and look and play the same. So when you have an assets library and it's not a big assets library, you do run the risk of things becoming oversaturated. And I think that's kind of what some of the folks who make these video games, or at least the parent companies that make these games, what their concern is. So as much as I understand what y'all were saying, like when it comes to maybe not Pokemon, but Shadow of Mordor, and the gameplay mechanic of you fight this character in the beginning and you have this basically a rivalry that's documented and you can build upon within the game. But Warner Brothers being the ones that own that mechanic, that gameplay mechanic, and so other games can't feature that gameplay mechanic. I guess my question is, when it comes to at least using that gameplay mechanic, which seems to be like a rivalry system that has history linked to it, or a developing history within the game. Like, there are other games that have rivalries. The first one that comes to my mind is a Nintendo game, Pokemon, with Gary and Ash, or just Pokemon in general. And it's not the same rivalry mechanic system, but it makes me wonder, like, all right, so what's next? Is Nintendo going to come at Warner Brothers and be like, well, y'all have a rivalry mechanic, and we came up with the rivalry mechanic first, and it's just like, yeah, but it doesn't work in the same way as this, right? Let's say Nintendo won that lawsuit. Like, to me, there's because things aren't being made clear, and it's really the big corporations that are arguing and have the bank to argue as we watch. And yes, it does affect all of us who buy video games and play video games. So at the end of the day, it can all be a very bit concerning, and you're wondering what's going to happen with the state of just video game making, also video game preservation, and how we play these games. I did want to keep this video like short-ish or shorter than where we could go with this, but I do want to make this a continuing conversation. So if you wouldn't mind, let me know down in the comments, like you did with the last joint. What do you think about just this overall conversation and issue of preserving video games, whether it be the state of emulators, emulations, what's your stance on emulators and emulations? Are you for it? Are you not for it? Are you somewhere kind of in the middle? When it comes to Nintendo versus Pocket Pair, patent infringements versus copyright infringements, do you think that there is a case to be made? Do you think that gameplay mechanics should be patented? And if so, for how long? And what is should there be a licensing fee? Or what's a reasonable licensing fee, I guess? And I don't know like what the licensing fees are now for it. So if you have more knowledge about that, leave that down below as well too. On that note, thank y'all for watching. Thank y'all for taking the time to watch. Let's have a conversation about this, and let's try our best to enjoy playing these video games that we love, the old ones and the new ones, and our best to support those who make these things in the first place, especially the independent ones. On that note, I'm out, y'all. It's your man, Soul Man IT. Thank y'all for watching. Until next time, peace.